ونص اللي فاتوا من محمد محمود الأولى وحتى اليوم، جانيت لاف كانت هي الصديقة والزميلة اللي كنت دايما بلجأ لها في النوع ده من الأسئلة. مش بس لأنه جانيت تربطني بيها علاقة صداقة وزمالة وإلهام منذ ما قبل الثورة، وبتجمعنا مع بعض تحالفات كتير وشبكات كتير، لكن كمان لأنه جانيت هي الوحيدة من أصدقائي ومن زملائي اللي بيشتغلوا في مجال حقوق الإنسان واللي بيديروا منظمات حقوق إنسان، اللي مارست الإرهاب المسلح لفترة طويلة في حياتها، وبالتالي كانت هي الشخص الوحيد اللي ممكن ألجأ له من صحابي وأعتبره في نفس الوقت صديق وإرهابي. عادة الإرهابيين بنتعامل معاهم إما كموكلين للمكتب ده للمنظمة دي، أو كضحايا أو معارف، أو أكيد مش كأصدقاء. لما جانيت قررت أخيرا أن هي تزور مصر للمرة الأولى بعد الثورة وللمرة الأولى على الإطلاق وهي هنا في أجازة، صممنا أن احنا كمان نوسع المناقشة الثنائية اللي بقى لها وقت طويل بتدور بيني وبينها ونشارك حضراتكم فيها. تصادف مع المناقشة دي ومع الزيارة دي انه زي ما حضراتكم شفتوا في الدعوة، جنوب افريقيا احتفلت يوم 21 مارس مش بعيد الام ومش ببداية الربيع، وانما بيوم حقوق الانسان، اللي هو اليوم اللي تم تحديده بعد مذبحة، مذبحة شاربفيل اللي هي كانت ذكراها في 21 مارس، واللي اللي على اساسها تم تحديد اليوم ده ليصبح بعد سقوط نظام الفصل العنصري هو يوم حقوق الانسان، اللي قتل فيها 69، طبعا حاجه عاديه جدا بالنسبه لنا في مصر دلوقتي. بعد هذه المذبحه اتخذت المقاومه في جنوب افريقيا وحزب المؤتمر الوطني الإفريقي قرار باعلان النضال الشعبي المسلح ضد نظام الفصل العنصري. ده مش موضوع مناقشه النهارده المذبحه في حد ذاتها، لكن هي خلفيه مهمه للمناقشه النهارده، خلفيه تاريخيه مهمه هنبني عليها كتير من الحوار بتاعنا. جانيت لاف زي ما بعض حضراتكم شاف على الدعوه، هقول لكم نبذه بسيطه عنها. هي اشتركت في النضال ضد حكم الفصل العنصري من سنه 74. بدأت بالمشاركة في برنامج أطلقوا مجموعة من طلاب الجامعات لبناء المدارس في الريف، وبعدها انخرطت في النشاط السياسي الطلابي وفي الحركة النقابية الصاعدة في السبعينات في جنوب أفريقيا. في نهاية 75 بدأت المشاركة في العمل السري مع المؤتمر الوطني الإفريقي، وقتها كان منظمة محظورة. انضمت بعدها للجناح المسلح للحركة، وفي ابريل 76 اشتركت في العمل السري في الوقت اللي قامت فيه انتفاضه السويتو، واستمرت في العمل السري المسلح بعد ذلك الى ان اضطرت الى ترك جنوب افريقيا سنه 78. تفرغت وقتها للعمل مع المؤتمر الوطني الافريقي في المنفى. قضت جانيت 10 سنوات في المنفى، معظمها كان في دول الجنوب الافريقي، إلى أن جاء قرار اللجنة الوطنية التنفيذية للمؤتمر الوطني الإفريقي بعودة قيادات الحركة إلى جنوب أفريقيا. بدأ وقتها كان القرار بيشمل عودة قيادات الحركة إلى داخل البلاد وبدء برنامج لتدريب الكوادر داخل جنوب أفريقيا، تدريبات سياسية وعسكرية. عادت جانيت إلى بلدها بعد أن اتخذت اسم مستعار وعودة العمل السري داخل جنوب أفريقيا لمدة 4 سنوات بهوية مزيفة. في الفترة من 91 ل 94 جانيت اشتركت في المفاوضات اللي راعتها منظمة الكوديسا أو المؤتمر من أجل أفريقيا ديمقراطية، واستمرت في العمل السياسي واشتركت في المفاوضات متعددة الأطراف اللي أسفرت عن إنشاء المجلس الانتقالي التنفيذي. سنة 94 انتخبت جانيت لعضوية البرلمان زي ما حضراتكم عارفين في الانتخابات الأولى، وترأست لجنة الزراعة وشؤون المياه والغابات في البرلمان الأول، وترأست بعدها لجنة شؤون المياه بعد ما أعيد انتخابها في برلمان 99. إلى جانب ذلك جانيت كانت عضوة في الجمعية التأسيسية، اشتركت في عملية المفاوضات الدستورية وكتابة مسودة دستور جنوب أفريقيا كعضو في اللجنة الدستورية للجمعية التأسيسية. جانيت تركت بعدها العمل البرلماني وتفرغت للعمل في مجال المياه والغابات، لكن في 2006 بدأت تعمل كمدير تنفيذي، ودي اللحظة اللي أنا عرفت فيها جانيت طبعا، لكن كنت أعرف تاريخها من قبل ده. أصبحت هي المدير التنفيذي لمركز الموارد القانونية أو Legal Resources Center، منظمة رائدة للعمل في مجال حقوق الإنسان في جنوب إفريقيا، بتقدم المساعدة القانونية في 4 مراكز مختلفة من جنوب إفريقيا، إلى جانب طبعا نشاطها في جوانب مختلفة في مجال حقوق الإنسان. وفي 2009 أصبحت أحد أعضاء مفوضية حقوق إنسان جنوب إفريقيا، اللي هي المجلس القومي لحقوق الإنسان في جنوب إفريقيا. دي مقدمة الحقيقة مخلة وموجزة جدا لتاريخ هذه السيدة والصديقة والزميلة. جانيت هتتكلم مع حضراتكم لمدة من تلت ساعة لنص ساعة تقريبا.
So first of all, thank you very much, and thank you all for inviting me to this meeting. Coming from South Africa and seeing a country that is in the throes of a very exciting moment, but also a very challenging moment in history, is truly a privilege. So thank you for that. I plan to just give you a historical outline of what happened at Shاربفيل and what events were set in motion by the events of Shárabfil and what it means to us today. Doing that my intention will be for us to understand that what happened at Shárabfil was something that at the time it was not possible to predict what would happen in the years that followed. And I think that in any moment of change in a society, I would say that the first rule would be that you have to move with what you have in front of you with an aim in mind, but you certainly can't assume that you will be able to predict all the steps. The best wisdom, as we all know, is a wisdom of hindsight. So some of what I will say now is to give you an idea of what was thought of at the time. And I will end with some reflection with the hindsight, the wisdom of hindsight. So in South Africa in the 1960s, racism was not just something that happened in South Africa, but it was the law. You had to be a racist, basically. So the idea that you had the majority of the population in South Africa being against the system was something that everybody would have assumed. But in practice, to be against something and to take various actions that express your opposition is 2 different things. So in the build-up to 1960, right through the 1950s in South Africa, there were a lot of demonstrations, there were a lot of mobilizations, there was a lot of distribution of literature, of materials, to make the population that had been disenfranchised stand up for the rights of the people of South Africa as a whole. Now, one of the most important things that was used firstly by British colonialists and then by apartheid was the system of influx control. And the way people's movement was controlled in South Africa was through having to have a document called a pass, which was a document that if you were walking just from your house to the person next door, you had to carry, whether it was in the night, whether it was in the day. If you did not have that document on you and you were an African person, you would be arrested. Okay. So the pass was something that was like a chain around people's neck. And you can imagine that people were very hostile, very opposed to it. But it took years of mobilization to get people from that point to a point where they were prepared to destroy their own passes, where they were prepared to present themselves without the pass to police stations and say, arrest us all. That was the moment in 1960 where the African National Congress and a smaller breakaway organization, the Pan-Africanist Congress, both organizations, declared that year as a year in which the resistance to the pass laws would be mobilizing well, the majority, the overwhelming majority of the population, all of those who were disenfranchised and all of the Democrats in South Africa. So the Pan-Africanist Congress, the PAC, started its campaign on the 21st of March 1960. And what it did was it had some individual leaders who went to police stations in smaller groups because big demonstrations were banned. You couldn't have people who would be meeting, more than 10 people meeting was not allowed. So people would go in smaller groups at a few police stations. It wasn't many, but there were about 5 police stations, present themselves and say, arrest us. But in one township called being a very isolated, separated area where Africans lived, which was called Sharpeville, the resistance was greater. And the first thing to look at is why was the resistance greater? The resistance was greater because this was supposed to be a model township where the African population was, quote, well behaved, unquote. But of course, as a result of that oppression, the anger in that township had reached boiling point. So when people went to the police station, initially hundreds started moving through the township, and by the time they got to the police station, there was a demonstration of around 5,000 people outside the police station. The police got reinforcements, and so there were about 300 armed police. You had aeroplanes, jets, flying low above the crowd in order to try and intimidate people. And at one point, it's alleged, one of the demonstrators threw a stone. We don't know who it was, we don't know if the stone was thrown, but that was the excuse. So one stone with jets, 300 armed police, was enough to enable the police to open with live bullets on the crowd. And 69 people were killed, most of them shot in the back. And you had about 130 people injured seriously, having to go to hospital. So what happened was that the country, which had already been in a state of mobilization, rose up in protest because it was just outside of what could be tolerated. Now I'm saying what's important here is that the country was already mobilized. It didn't happen only because that incident of violence was something people couldn't tolerate. Yes, they couldn't tolerate it. But again, to move from anger to really demonstrating and taking risk in your own right is a different step. You have to be almost there yourself. It's not something that will happen on the spur of the moment very easily. So what we had was a situation where the country got mobilized, the apartheid regime was on the defensive, and this is the start of a process. Now, up until that point, both the ANC and the PAC repeatedly, their leadership repeatedly, said that they were committed to non-violent struggle. But what happened after Sharpeville was that the question of how much can people tolerate was, of course, the #1 question in people's minds. And it's a situation that I think everybody can identify with. But at the same time, the question then is, what do you do? How do you move from one situation to the other? And I'm going to look at this through the lens of the party that eventually played the leadership role in the liberation struggle and is the government in power, and that's through the lens of the ANC. Now, what happened was that the apartheid regime, being on the defensive, was talking about, it had a commission of inquiry. The commission of inquiry tried to whitewash and excuse all the police behavior. It made many demonstrations of white Afrikaners, particularly, that to be having patriotic demonstrations. And in the end, it declared itself a republic and got rid of the British Queen and all these other things. And there was a lot of mobilization of white South Africans who supported apartheid. But at the same time, while this was happening, the ANC took a decision that not only did it need to continue the protests within South Africa, and it was banned within 2 weeks of Sharpeville, the ANC and the PAC were banned. Not only did it have to do that, but it had to be clear that it needed to get the outside world to understand what was happening. So Oliver Tambo, who acted as the president of the ANC up until from that time, from the time of Albert Lutuli's death in a few months later after Sharpeville, he acted from that time up until 1985 as the acting president of the ANC, and only in 1985 did he accept to become president of the ANC. He went out of the country, starting with a visit to Ghana, to begin to mobilize people to understand what had taken place, what the true story was, and what the state of anger was in the country. And a number of things happened as a result. You had a situation where the United Nations Security Council passed its resolution calling for an end to apartheid. At the end of the year, in December, it passed another resolution which was dealing with a whole lot of issues around independence of colonial countries. And it was on the back of that that the Commonwealth took a decision that racial equality was a requirement to become a member of the Commonwealth and to remain a member of the Commonwealth. And as a result, South Africa withdrew from the Commonwealth. It was a time when in Cairo, the preparatory meeting in June 1961 for the formation of the non-aligned movement was taking place. And on the back of anti-colonial struggles, it was a time when the international community was ripe for mobilization. Now, I'm raising this because, as you will see, over the period of time from 1960, around the whole question of armed struggle, there are a lot of realities and practicalities that need to be taken into account. Now, one of the issues around boycotts, around isolation, around material support, depended on the strength of the anti-apartheid movement internationally. It depended on the international context. And right through our struggle, you will see that the international context is one issue that can never be underestimated. What happened basically during the period of 1961 was the ANC, having been banned, having been involved in many discussions right across the country, had already decided by the beginning of 1961 that the tactic of non-violent protest was not going to be able to succeed to bring apartheid to a point where it recognized that it could no longer be tolerated. And so there were a number of activities that were being organized within the country. And in December, on the 16th of December 1961, what you had was a situation where the ANC launched its armed struggle. The military wing of the ANC was made public, Umkhonto weSizwe, and the tactic, or the strategic approach rather, that the African National Congress adopted in those early days was the strategy of armed propaganda. Now again, when one's looking at the question of military action and the way in which the ANC pursued this, not only was the ANC mindful of the reality of the international community and the international discourse, but it was very mindful of the fact that it had a population that it needed to convince of this approach to struggle. Why did it need to convince? Because, first of all, there is violence that happens in an armed conflict that is not about only dealing with who you define as the enemy. It's also a violence that deals with who you define as your comrades. People are killed. Families are harassed, are taken out of their homes, are intimidated. It's a violence that becomes endemic in the whole society. So you have to be sure as the ANC that the society understands and embraces, but also has a belief that the impossible, what is believed to be impossible, is actually possible. And that's what armed propaganda was all about. And so there were actions that were conducted. Electricity pylons were put to the ground, and other bombing activities took place. It was about small installations. Did anybody in the ANC believe that because you blew up an electricity pylon that apartheid would fall? No. But the reality was that the population could identify with the fact that there were people who were saying enough is enough and could debate that issue amongst themselves. Very, very soon after that, a lot of practical issues arose. The first practical issue was that if you start an armed struggle, you need to know that you're going to be able to have the support that you need for the armed struggle. We all know that arms, for a start, are not something that, it's something very easy to obtain, and certainly it's something that costs a great deal of money. So Nelson Mandela went out of the country, visiting, amongst other places, Algeria, Egypt, and Ghana, in order to get backing for Mkhonto weSizwe. Most of the activities of the armed struggle were being coordinated by, all of the activities that were planned, but there were some unplanned activities, but most of the activities were being coordinated by a high command of Mkhonto weSizwe, which had its headquarters in a place just outside Johannesburg called Rivonia. Unfortunately, a collaborator with the regime infiltrated one of the groups, and Rivonia was then surrounded by police. And in July 1963, many of the leaders of the African National Congress, but particularly of Mkhonto weSizwe, were caught at Rivonia, were arrested, and put on trial. So now the question was, there were obviously other leaders, but the question was, if you're going to be planning the kind of actions that needed to be planned, if you're going to take things to the kind of scale that needed to be taken, you have to have a leadership that can carry out the business of mobilizing support and doing what needs to be done that has a degree of protection. So it was decided that the leadership of the command structure of Mkhonto weSizwe needed to go into exile, and thereafter there was a period where the leadership the leadership of the army needed to be externally based. And again, external conditions come into play. Neighboring then Rhodesia, neighboring then Bechuanaland, now called Botswana, neighboring Mozambique and Angola, were all in the hands of hostile colonial administrations. So when one's talking about an army headquarters that's based, you're talking about a leadership structure that's based not just at the border, but is based a distance away. These are hard choices, but they had to be made. The question then is, once you're externally based and you're training people externally and you're developing your understanding of weaponry externally, you have to have the possibility to re-infiltrate people into the country. And so in 1969, the African National Congress met at Morogoro to look at its successes and also its failures. And one of the biggest challenges was to re-infiltrate trained operatives back into South Africa. The campaign had seen an alliance between the Zimbabwean Liberation Organization, ZAPU, and Mkhonto weSizwe as part of something called the Hwanki campaign, but this had not succeeded. They had been stopped for the most part. There were some people that got through. What became very clear to everybody at Morogoro, and so this would be a second lesson. The first lesson would be the fact that it's something that involves a huge number of very practical issues. It involves the need to have a command structure that is insulated and able to deal with those practical issues. But it also, at Morogoro, the second really important lesson was taken to heart. And it was something that had been done instinctively up until then, but there had been a separation to some extent between the command structures of the Liberation Army and the command structures of the political movement. So one of the things that Morogoro put in place was a recognition that you cannot separate your armed struggle, even if it's an armed propaganda struggle, from your political struggle, from winning over the hearts and minds of the citizenry. When you do not engage in the political struggle, you have no hope of actually succeeding in the armed struggle. Because many of the people who were armed insurgents of Umkhonto we Sizwe were stopped precisely because there wasn't a sufficient body of support to receive them into the country and to protect them along the way. So many actions took place with Umkhonto we Sizwe post-1969, but what became very, very significant was the work that was done to mobilize the population politically. So you had, first of all, work that was being done by the South African Congress of Trade Unions, which was one of the Congress alliance partners of the ANC, to build up a new trade union movement. We did have trade unions in South Africa, but they were what we called sweetheart unions. So there was a need to build up a real body of trade union activity, that people who were working people could see that the liberation struggle is also about bread and butter. Revolutionaries, maybe when they're already revolutionaries, are prepared to have hardship and hunger. But people who have yet to be convinced cannot be convinced of the value of what you are doing for their lives if they are having no means to support their families, where they're having no food, where their basic bread and butter issues are not being addressed. So the trade union movement and the establishment of a trade union movement that was not a sweetheart union movement was a key element of the ANC's strategy after Morogoro. Secondly, again, we have a situation where we have a context change, an international change. The coup in Portugal resulted in a real advance, both in Angola and Mozambique, in the struggles in our regional countries.